on the 5th, so just keep that in mind. Can we have the roll call from the clerk?
Mr. Amrine?
Here.
Ms. Elko? Here. Mr. Clapper?
Here.
Mr. De Leon?
Here.
Mr. Hook?
Here.
Ms. Rosenberg? Here. Ms. Schaefer-Fish? Here. Mr. Sidoti?
Here.
Mr. Turner?
Here. Okay, we have opening remarks by Heidi.
Yes, thank you.
Uh-oh.
I think the beautiful spring weather seems a little bit incongruous with the dark clouds and cold winds that are blowing at the federal government level and that are impacting our standing all over the world. Our system of government, our actual government, while not perfect, has been the envy of the world in its competence and its never-ending fight against corruption. I said it's not perfect, but still, I work with the federal government in my job, and I can see that there are many levels that many people interpret as red tape or unnecessary, and others see as a way to avoid corruption. I fear that both competence and fairness are at stake, as well as our moral foundations. Let this gathering storm not infect us at the local level. As we go into the spring, may we as individuals, council representatives, and city staff, as well as community members, strive to uphold our values and work to counter this descent into whatever you might want to call it. Nobody can quite decide yet, as best we can. May we continue to celebrate our diversity as a nation and a city of both Native Americans and many kinds of immigrants. Let us promote equality, equity, and fairness for all, and strive for transparency and inclusiveness. May we also offer what we can to promote and maintain our partnership with Kent State University staff, faculty, and students, as well as our business and nonprofit communities who may also be struggling. We did this during the most recent time that was also called unprecedented, and a time of uncertainty and even fear. And I think we can continue to look for innovative ways to remain true to ourselves and meet the needs of those who depend on us. Our levels of government are interrelated, that is true, and we're all concerned about that to a certain extent. In fact, my job has just changed as a result of what's happening at the federal government level. But we don't have to fall into fear or compliance with these values. Let us uphold our vision and our Kent values, and remember our true greatness as Americans. Let's stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I
pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, thank you. Public communications, does the clerk have anybody?
No.
All right, moving on to written communications.
On March 6, 2025, the March agenda, February 25 draft meeting minutes, and statistical report were received from the Health Department and posted online. On March 11, 2025, the agenda and staff report for the upcoming March Planning Commission meeting were received. On March 11, 2025, the office received notice that there would be no March 17th meeting for the Board of Zoning Appeals. That's it.
Okay, thank you. City Manager report, Mr. Amrine.
Yes.
Yes, all right.
I'd like to move items 1 through 16 on the city manager's report.
Second.
Second, is there any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Mr. Roller, you have more?
No, thank you, Mayor.
All right. We're going to get into our consent agenda with the clerk.
Yep.
We-
4.1, approval of February regular council meeting minutes. 4.2, approval of March council committee meeting minutes. 4.3, draft 2025-14, an ordinance authorizing the finance director upon the issuance of a certificate of availability of funds to pay certain purchase orders made that exceed $3,000 and declaring an emergency. Draft 2025-16, an ordinance authorizing the finance director upon the issuance of a certificate of availability of funds to pay certain purchase orders made that exceed $3,000 and declaring an emergency. Draft 2025-17, an ordinance authorizing the city manager or his designee.
Who's humming?
Okay, I'll try that again. 2025-17, an ordinance authorizing the city manager or his designee to take all actions necessary to accept the Northeast Ohio Public Energy Council, NOPEC, 2025 Community Event Sponsorship Program Award in the amount of $2,000 and declaring an emergency. Draft 2025-18, an ordinance authorizing the city manager or his designee to accept the Northeast Ohio Public Energy Council, NOPEC, Energized Community Grant Award in the amount of $50,733 and declaring an emergency. 2025-19, an ordinance authorizing the city manager or his designee to enter into an agreement with Franklin Township for the Hudson Road Phase 5 resurfacing project and declaring an emergency. Draft 2025-20, an ordinance authorizing the city manager or his designee to enter into a joint planning study agreement with the City of Kent Parks and Recreation Department, Kent Service Department, and the Davy Tree Expert Company to integrate the city's arboretum and the new Davy Tree Arboretum and declaring an emergency. Draft 2025-21, an ordinance authorizing the City of Kent Service Department to apply for grant funds in the amount of $196,000 and to accept the grant if awarded with corresponding appropriation of funds and declaring an emergency. Draft 2025-22, an ordinance enacting Section 351.041 titled Prohibition of More Than 3 Vehicles Per Address Parked in the City's Right-of-Way of the codified ordinances of the City of Kent and declaring an emergency.
Can I pull that one from the consent agenda to discuss a little more?
Okay.
You need a motion to do
Yeah.
that? You're making a motion, who's second?
Second.
Second by Chris. Any discussion about holding this? All in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Okay, thank you.
Okay.
We need a motion for suspension.
Move suspension.
Second.
Second by Gwen. Please call the roll for suspension.
Mr. De Leon?
Yes.
Mr. Hook?
Yes.
Ms. Rosenberg?
Yes.
Ms. Schaefer-Bish?
Yes.
Mr. Sidoti?
Yes.
Mr. Turner?
Yes.
Mr. Amrine?
Yes.
Ms. Selko? Mr. Clapper?
Yes.
Move adoption.
Second.
Second by Gwen. Is there any discussion on adopting any of the above except the one that was pulled? Seeing none, please call the roll for adoption.
Mr. Hook?
Yes.
Ms. Rosenberg?
Yes.
Ms. Schaefer-Bish?
Yes.
Mr. Sidoti?
Yes.
Mr. Turner?
Yes.
Mr. Amrine?
Yes.
Ms. Selko? Mr. Clapper?
Yes.
Yes.
Oh, I'm sorry. Mr. De Leon? Yes. Okay.
Passes. Once again,
Yeah.
all the material that was handed to council for discussion was on March 5th to support these ordinances. Getting to the standing committee, there's nothing from committee of the whole, nothing from community development, nothing from health.
Point of order, Mr. Mayor. We still have to do the discussion on 2025-022, the last item.
Oh, we didn't do that?
No,
That
I
was
pulled that
pulled.
one.
It was
Oh,
pulled
right.
back into streets, you just haven't got there yet.
Oh, okay, so it'll go to that?
Yes.
All right,
How's
thanks.
that?
Health and public safety, nothing, land use committee, nothing, streets and sidewalks. Now we wanna,
Yes.
So after the last meeting, I went back and forth on this a lot in my head, and I have a little bit of a problem, I guess, from just where I standpoint, from a law standpoint. We have a law that we could enforce that would alleviate this problem already. And I understand the situation on the street and what's going on there and the history of the parking on the street, and I understand the problem that's causing this to come up. I have a little bit of a personal conflict with enacting another law to address an issue where there's already a law in place that could address it. And my other problem is, let's say that this law is enacted and all the vehicles are off the street. Who's to say that somebody isn't then going to complain that, well, there's these 3 cars parked on the street where there's not supposed to be, or parked in the tree lawns where there's not supposed to be cars in the tree lawn, and then the complaint is just coming from a different direction. So I don't know if really I can stand behind it, given that, because it seems to just be a little bit of like, just, I understand why we're not fully going out there and enforcing it every day because of the parking situation on the street. But it seems like we're singling somebody out, and it seems like we're leaving the door open to have the roles reversed in this situation.
There's discussion. Robert, you got your hand on it?
Yeah. The rationale, I think, and the purpose of the ordinance was to address a lot of vehicles being on the street and creating a blighted condition, not moving. While I tend to agree about the issue of enforcement in some regards, I think the issue of the number of vehicles that a person would have. In this case, there are 2 properties where this actually became the issue.
Right, I understand where it started from.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That actually have as many as 9 vehicles.
Right.
Those are then pushed out onto the street, which diminishes the quality of life for other residents who may also want to park on the street, but they have limit themselves to the number of vehicles that they'll place out there. This is not an issue really about parking. It's more of an issue of blighted vehicles, which would be on the property. When you get as many as 9 vehicles, you're starting to wonder what the purpose is and how much those would rotate. They're coming off of individual properties and driveways, spilling onto the street. That becomes problematic, and that's why the residents in that area have looked and watched that. The enforcement mechanism, and ultimately, you're correct, I understand too that the police have limited manpower in dealing with things. But if they can keep these vehicles, the number of vehicles which are on properties, then moved off the property onto the right-of-way, doing a number of things. They're condensing the driving lanes, because a lot of them are parked up near the corners, near signs that condense the area for people to turn. It becomes a health and safety issue.
Right.
So that's the issue. I believe at one time, I think the thought was to do 2 vehicles as opposed to 3. I thought, well, maybe that's a little more problematic. Going to 3, I think, is reasonable. How many cars does one property owner need to have? We're not doing parking lots here. It diminishes the look of the neighborhood, the effectiveness of the neighborhood. Also, I believe it creates additional problems well, I'll stick with that.
Yeah.
I think it diminishes the quality of life for the residents. That's why they requested us addressing it. And I think that what was broached by city departments seemed reasonable to me anyway.
Yeah. Can I follow up to that?
Certainly.
So I guess my follow-up question, I know where the discussion was from last time. So the specific one in question with the 9 cars on the street, is there appropriate parking on that property for all those vehicles, like in a drive, not in the yard, but in a driveway?
Appropriate?
Like,
parking?
so we don't allow front yard parking.
Right.
So do all the houses on that street have adequate driveway? Like, does he have adequate
Yeah.
driveway space for those 9 vehicles?
No, he
No.
doesn't have adequate space for 9. I don't know many
I don't either.
properties
Yeah.
that have adequate space
Right.
for 9
Right.
vehicles. That's the issue.
Right. And it sounds like there's, like, other people are needing to park on the street there, which technically by the letter of the law, we shouldn't be allowing them to park in that tree lawn area, but I know that that's gonna be slated for improvement in 2027. So,
Yeah, that,
right,
I don't believe that, again,
right,
there seems to be adequate parking. There are driveways for just about every property on the street.
right,
The issue is that you have some properties, 2 to be specific, that actually have an overabundance of vehicles. They have 8 to 9 vehicles.
right,
So those are then pushed out. And the bigger issue too, for me, is like when you get a snowstorm or whatever, you've got these vehicles then parked on the street. Where do you move them since they can't move them to their driveway? They then create a hazard for the city as it relates to the ability to go down and do adequate, cleaning of the streets,
right,
shoveling of the streets, because you've got vehicles that are parked out there. Like I said, you're gonna have, he can get about, the one up the street on Franklin and Elm can get about 4, amazingly 4 cars in his driveway. But then there are 5 left out on the street. A lot of those initially were parked up at the corner of the street. When people would turn off of Franklin Avenue onto Elm, the area had been then reduced
Right.
for the right-of-way. And you reduce that down to 1 lane. Traffic is then backed up, turning onto Elm and also coming up.
but just
off Elm.
to play devil's advocate, like, by the letter of the law, were those cars illegally parked?
Well,
that-
actually, we found out that they aren't.
So they are legally parked?
Well, they were, at one time, they were parked up at the corner, which was, they were required to move down 12 feet. Now, and we have to clear up exactly how far they can be down, because when people are turning, that becomes an issue.
I think the ORC is 30 feet from an intersection?
But they moved the signage down to about 12.
Okay,
So it's about 12 feet, which does then reduce the area that they're turning on to.
right,
So that has become somewhat problematic. You're right, I mean, there are probably any number of ways, and maybe we wouldn't have this situation existing if we'd been able to do enforcement adequately before.
right.
But there's been, this kind of clarifies things
Yeah.
a bit, and it reduces, I think, the impediments.
Well, I understand where the problem comes from, and I don't disagree about trying to help out the situation, because I kind of know the area well enough. My problem is just, we have one law in place, and we're putting another one on top of it to address the issue when the other one would technically take care of it. So that's my only problem. My problem isn't with the specific situation.
What law do we have in place?
So I was under the impression from our last discussion that these cars that are parked in the street are parked technically in the tree lawn, because there's not a curb there.
No.
No, isn't that what we discussed in the last meeting?
No, they have been given, down on that end of town, an exemption to park. The tree lawn issue is not the one. It's a right-of-way issue. The people who park on tree lawns are cited
Right,
for parking on tree
Okay.
lawns. But the other aspect is that the number of vehicles has become the issue. And that would go again, like I said, if you have a snowstorm or something, they don't have adequate ability to move those
I
vehicles
totally understand.
onto private
Yeah.
property.
No, they have.
Been granted an exemption. They just have, it just hasn't been enforced,
Well,
from what I think.
I've
is
been
what-
told, now I had this discussion with a lieutenant. He told me that they've been given, they have discretion on enforcement in some of those. And so my argument was, you have discretion up until there's a complaint. But whatever's on the books, then you're required to enforce. And so, yeah, but this is, let's not get too far afield on it. This issue right now was brought up more about blight and the conditions that are created when you have so many vehicles which can't be adequately stored on the properties at which the owner lives. And so they're now pushed out into the right-of-way.
I totally understand. And just again, to play devil's advocate, I own more cars than will fit in my driveway. And so I choose to keep them somewhere else. Because I can't park them on the street in my street. It's illegal. Well, it's illegal certain hours of the day. So I guess my one question would be, so technically the cars that are on the street right now, and I don't know if we need to ask the chief this, like, all the cars on that street are parked legally by the letter of the law?
Yeah, either that or they're cited.
So, I don't mean to, the law director has reminded me, and I would agree, we're turning this into a committee discussion. You've already discussed it in committee.
Okay.
It's totally
That's
fine. Jeff can say, I'm against it for these reasons, and I'm going to vote no. Or Jeff could say, I want to move, can we, I don't know, procedurally, how does he get it back into committee? You can make a motion to send it back.
Put it back in committee.
But we kind of shouldn't turn this into a committee.
Well, that's fine. And then I guess my other question would be, maybe for legal, is can I add an amendment to the motion to revisit
try.
once the improvements are done on Elm Street?
You're never bound, I mean, I don't know if you need, if that's necessary, council
Yeah,
has the
it's not
ability-
So we
necessary.
just look at it down the road?
Yes,
Exactly.
yes.
And I'm not trying to like hamstring the situation. I just personally, I was a little bit conflicted about the way it ended up coming out, so.
So you can move forward with the vote.
Did we move suspension? Was there a motion for suspension on that particular item? All right, I'd like to,
The only thing that we haven't made a motion for is draft number
Right.
2025-022, which is the subject we're talking about.
Right.
So if you want to make a motion.
yeah, I'll move suspension.
Second.
Second by Glenn. Please call the suspension.
Ms. Rosenberg?
Yes.
Ms. Schaefer-Bish?
Yes.
Mr. Sidoti?
Yes.
Mr. Turner?
Now,
Mr. Amrine?
Yes.
Ms. Selko?
Yes.
Mr. Clapper?
Yes.
Mr. De Leon?
Yes.
Mr. Hook?
Yes.
Adoption.
Move adoption.
Second.
Second by Chris. Any discussion on adopting this? Seeing none, please call the roll for adoption.
Ms. Schaefer-Bish?
Yes.
Mr. Sidoti?
Yes.
Mr. Turner?
yes.
Mr. Amrine?
Yes.
Ms. Selko?
Yes.
Mr. Clapper?
No.
Mr. De Leon?
Yes.
Mr. Hook?
Yes.
Ms. Rosenberg?
Yes.
Draft 2025-22 passes.
We're back on unfinished business. Is there any? Seeing none, moving on, is there any new business? Seeing none, move on, council member comments, anything?
Go ahead, Roger.
Well, Roger, had- they beat you, yeah.
Okay, I just, oh, yeah, I gotta do this. They can hear me. Yeah. You know, one of the things that I think is always problematic is the terminology we use. A right-of-way is a right-of-way, whether it's curved or not, correct? And I have people who tell me about the devil strip, which is that they call a tree lawn a devil strip, they call things a right-of-way. And so one of the things I think that we need to be cognizant about is that, and Jeff brings up a good point, you know, I think if we all talk about a right-of-way and the city's right-of-way and how do we enforce in the right-of-way, it takes away all the conversation about curbs and
and tree lawns and everything else. And I think if we come back and we revisit this, then, you know, we can revisit because technically a right-of-way is a right-of-way. If I pull up on my tree lawn between the curb and the sidewalk, I'm in the right-of-way. So I think we just need to clarify some of the language we use and have a better understanding. Maybe our law director can help us down the line with that, so that we're talking apples and oranges. And I think, Jeff, that's where the confusion comes, because they're parked in the right-of-way, and we say it's illegal to park in the right-of-way, yet we're going to allow it here until the completion of the curbs and all that. Because it's easier to enforce, I would guess, Chief, when there's curbing. Easier to enforce right-of-way. It's pretty clear. Someone pulls up over the curb, right? So that's just a comment that I have.
Jeff?
So my comment, Robert, do you have a hand up? I couldn't tell if you had a hand up.
I'll listen to you.
So my comment goes back to our last regular meeting. Mr. Turner brought up making a statement against the tariffs. And there were some pros and cons of that, one of them being some fear about repercussion. And given the opening remarks, given the state of everything that we're in, I think that making any kind of statement that we want without worry about repercussion about what the federal government's going to do or say to us or put us in the crosshairs of their social media attacks or anything like that, I think is the right move, because I think doing nothing and speaking out against what we think is wrong is the absolute worst thing we can possibly do. That's all I have for that.
Robin?
Yeah, I think I've become a bit confused regarding the statement of the right-of-way. And I think once the city moves to 2027 and they do the work on Elm Street, you won't have the problem. Things will be more clearly defined. But the reality is that there has been in that area, and it's been brought to my attention more than, and I've lived there for 60-some years, exactly what they've, and I said exempted because, quite frankly, I was told that in that area they would allow that because of the lack of parking, which really isn't accurate. The issue down there are a very limited number of properties that don't have an area to park. The issue was not parking, and that's not really why this was brought up as much, although I would look out and concerned me that when you've got that number of vehicles in a confined area, that when you're coming down doing maintenance or whatever, that's a problem. And a lot of the vehicles are not being maintained well. And the concern from people in that area then became, this doesn't look good. This is a diminution of our quality of life based on what's happening here. Storage in lots that they have vehicles. Now this was an issue for both the police and the community development department, both of who are acting diligently to try and address it along with the law department. So there are a number of areas we're still trying to clear up. This isn't the end of that. But I don't want to get off into the issue of simply this being a parking issue. It goes beyond that. And I think when the law director came up with the idea, she actually came from her on how we might be able to deal with it. I thought, quite frankly, it was appropriate, and I think it manages the situation that we're in right now. So,
Heidi.
Yeah, first I want to thank everyone for putting up with my opening words. I really relish the opportunity to be able to state my own opinions, and that people are hungry to hear such opinions. And of course, we need to be careful, but you know, we also need to be courageous. Secondly, I do want to remind everybody, please, to use your microphones. We do have people that are watching online and listening, And even though you think you can be heard, you have a booming voice or whatever, it's not necessarily true for here and also up there at the podium especially. So this is something that's very important to remember, that that's part of exercising transparency and openness, as being able to be heard by the public. Thank you.
I think we got to work with what we have, but when we get to our new building, you're going to find a whole different ballgame. Anybody else? Oh, Chris, I'm sorry.
I just put my hand up.
Got your mic on? All right, go.
It's on. Just to follow on Jeff's excellent point, I think that the question was raised: how does some of the actions at the federal level apply to us? So I did some research. A study by the Urban Institute that just came out this week found that 70% of Portage County nonprofits are considering, with $76 million at risk. If the freeze continues, county nonprofits would see a net reduction of over 25% of their operating revenue. This includes family and community services, whose essential services in 2023, this is from their annual report, included supporting 375 foster children and adoptions, 216,000 meals to food insecure individuals, and 22,971 bed nights for 474 unhoused veterans. Additionally, 61,000 Ohioans are estimated to lose their Medicaid coverage if the Governor DeWine's supported work requirements are put into effect. And as I was reminded at church this week, children don't work. The last is that Kent State has received about $63 million in NIH grants since 2020. With the reduction in indirect cost recovery, the university stands to lose nearly $18 million over 4 years in cuts to indirect rate recovery. And we know from indirect rate that goes to things like facilities, staff, keeping the lights on, all things that keep the quality of life pretty high for Kent State students. We may not feel it now, but this is, I think, gonna hit us. I had a very this is gonna seem very light. I'd like to do after this meeting, and I was speaking to the owner, and he said, increase the size of the large pizza from $10.99 to $12.99. Again, an anecdote, but these are the kind of cost increases we're likely to see. The data speaks for itself. I'm worried about county nonprofits. I'm worried about our ability to keep students happy and staying in Kent for the long term. I support Jeff and Robin and Heidi and all those who've spoken in support of anything that we can do to kind of lend our voice to ending those federal freezes. Thanks.
Anybody else?
Yeah.
Robin?
I will touch again on the issue of the burden shift, and that's what it is. I think we have to be very focused as a body coming out. A lot of people are going to wonder why we're speaking to this. Affects people in this community, especially middle class, low income people. What you do when you move to enforcing tariffs is that you place a disproportionate on middle and low income people. And we don't even know where they're shifting the money to. Why are you creating, what is the logic behind this? They're not moving this burden shift to address Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid. I think that'd be one thing if you're asking the low and moderate income people to start picking up more burden. It's something that actually impacts them. But when you're moving this so that the top 1-2% are able to get more bills. That's really unfair. And it's also a situation that you see being something that we as a body, governmental body, have to highlight and point out. This is why we're saying and doing this. Because when people go down to CVS and other places and they see the costs go up, they're impacted. Just as Chris said, they go down and the pizza goes from $10 to $12. Those implications are, I mean, really something that are impacting us, and especially people who are the least of us. So, and as Jeff was saying, at the end of the day, our ability to speak to that, especially as a blue island in a red sea, is important. Again, all politics is local. These things that happen on a national level happen here. They're impacting us here. So I am in total agreement with my three compadres that we have a not just a right, but a responsibility to speak up.
Further, anybody else? All right, mayor's report. The only thing I want to bring up, make sure you get your applications for the charter review in. It's going to be a long process picking this out, but at the first committee meeting in April, we'll be addressing it. So I do want to put this out. You know, we have a 15-person committee. I again say this, it's too big of a committee. So maybe you want to think about moving it down to 9. But that's just my thought. You 9 people are the ones that vote on this stuff. It isn't the mayor. So with that, hey, the weather's good.